On June 10, 1990, passengers boarded British Airways Flight 5390 in Birmingham, England. Their destination was the sunny coast of Malaga, Spain. It promised to be a routine holiday flight. The aircraft was a reliable BAC-111, a workhorse of short-haul travel. In the cockpit sat two experienced pilots. In the left seat was Captain Tim Lancaster, 42 years old, a seasoned aviator. Beside him was 39-year-old co-pilot Alistair Aitchison. For Aitchison, this was just another day at the office. He had no idea that within 20 minutes, he would be fighting one of the most terrifying battles in aviation history, all by himself. At 7:20 a.m., the plane took off. 13 minutes later, they were climbing through 17,000 feet over Oxfordshire. The seatbelt signs were off. The cabin crew began preparing the meal service. In the cockpit, the pilots unbuckled their shoulder harnesses to relax, leaving only their lap belts on. It was a calm, clear morning, until suddenly it wasn't. A deafening bang rocked the aircraft. Instantly, the cockpit filled with a thick, white fog of condensation. The windscreen on the captain's side had blown out. Because of the massive pressure difference between the inside of the plane and the thin air outside, the air rushed out with violent force. Captain Tim Lancaster was ripped from his seat. He was sucked headfirst out of the open window. However, he didn't fall. His legs caught on the flight controls. His upper body was outside the plane, battered by 300-mile-per-hour winds and freezing temperatures of minus 17 degrees Celsius. Inside, his legs were jamming the control column forward, forcing the plane into a steep, rapid dive. The cockpit door had blown off its hinges and crashed onto the navigation console. Nigel Ogden, a flight attendant who had just entered the cockpit to offer tea, reacted on pure instinct. He saw the captain disappearing out the window. He lunged forward and grabbed Lancaster by the waist, anchoring himself to a chair. Chaos consumed the flight deck. Papers and debris were swirling like a tornado. The roar of the wind was so loud that communication was impossible. Co-pilot Alistair Aitchison was now flying a diving plane alone, struggling to see through the fog and debris, while his captain was hanging out of the window, effectively pinning the nose down. Aitchison managed to overpower the jam controls and slow the dive, stabilizing the aircraft at 11,000 feet. Here the air was breathable, but the danger was far from over. Inside the cockpit, Nigel Ogden was losing his grip. His arms were freezing, and he was exhausted from holding the captain against the slipstream. He was slipping. Another crew member, John Heward, rushed in. He grabbed Ogden's belt. Another steward strapped himself into the pilot's jump seat and held on to Heward. It was a human chain, fighting to keep Tim Lancaster from falling to his death. By now, Captain Lancaster had shifted. He had slipped further out. His head was banging repeatedly against the side of the fuselage. Blood was streaking the window. His eyes were wide open, unblinking. To the crew inside, he looked dead. At this point, the crew faced a horrific dilemma. Should they let him go? Holding him was exhausting, and his body was creating massive drag, making the plane hard to fly. But co-pilot Aitchison shouted, "No! Do not let go!" His reasoning wasn't just sentimental. He knew that if Lancaster's body flew back, it could strike the tail or go into the engine, causing the entire plane to crash. They had to hold on to the corpse to save the passengers. Aitchison began a desperate descent toward Southampton Airport. He couldn't hear air traffic control properly over the wind. He had no charts for this airport. He was flying visually on adrenaline and instinct. Nigel Ogden, the man holding the captain, was developing frostbite and a dislocated shoulder. He swapped places with another steward, Simon Rogers, who strapped himself into the seat and held onto the captain's ankles for dear life. At 7:55 a.m., 22 minutes after the window blew out, Flight 5390 touched down safely at Southampton. The passengers, though terrified, were unharmed. But what about the captain? Emergency crews rushed the cockpit. They saw Tim Lancaster hanging limp from the window. They assumed the worst, but as they pulled him inside, he opened his eyes. Against all odds, despite being battered by freezing winds, suffering from oxygen deprivation, and enduring massive physical trauma, Tim Lancaster was alive. How could a windscreen just fall off a modern jet? The investigation revealed a shocking, simple error. 27 hours before the flight, a maintenance manager had replaced that windscreen. He needed 90 bolts to secure it. Instead of checking the manual, he visually matched the old bolts to grab new ones. He picked the wrong ones. The bolts he used were 0.026 inches too small in diameter. It was a microscopic difference, invisible to the naked eye, but fatal under pressure. When the plane pressurized, the bolts couldn't hold the window against the force. The tragedy led to major changes in aviation maintenance procedures and better training for engineers. As for the crew, they were hailed as heroes. Nigel Ogden and Alistair Atchison received the Queen's Commendation for valuable service in the air. And Captain Tim Lancaster, he recovered from his fractures and frostbite. Incredibly, just 5 months later, he returned to the skies. He flew until he retired, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Flight 5390 remains one of the most incredible stories of survival in aviation history. A reminder that even when the situation seems impossible, refusing to give up can make all the difference.